with us tonight. Hello, somebody on that. As many of you may remember, we started this journey because of our very own Minister of Ice Cream himself, Ben Cohen, who has been in the trenches, so to speak, for a very long time, sounding the alarm about the military industrial complex and how much money it sucks from domestic programs and also just our vision of what America and the world can be. And there is somebody else who has been sounding that same alarm, maybe not as long as the Minister of Ice Cream, but she has been
got a few years on me.
but she has indeed been sounding that alarm, and she is a major in the military as well. And so she comes with all of that background, lived experience, and then also being a public servant, not just as a congresswoman, but also in her activism. I have heard her many, many times, and I can hear her voice in my head right now, giving those speeches about how we are cutting short or denying how we could be investing those same funds domestically to make life better for the people right here at home and also protect our soldiers, our troops. So Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, it is so amazing to have you join me this evening on an episode of Drop the Mic Live. How are you today?
I am so good, Senator Turner. It's always a privilege to hang out with you. It's good to see your face. I can't wait to see you in person one day again. I so appreciate that you and Mr. Cohen are partnering up to create this platform to continue to bring attention to and shine a light on the fact that you've heard me talk about so many times, that yes, our foreign policy is domestic policy. They are right, inseparable. So every time, policymakers talk about, hey, we want to create this program or we want to add more funding to this program, whether it's healthcare, education, or infrastructure, all of these different things. Or when, a mom drops her kid off at school and finds that, they don't have up-to-date textbooks, or in the age of COVID, when kids are not able to go to school, parents are wondering how their kids can, log on to virtual classes if they don't have a laptop. The school doesn't have enough money to give them one. All of these different things on both ends of that spectrum, it all comes down to, how are you going to pay for it? Where are you going to get the money from? And where are we spending our money? And, you and I have talked so many times before about how much waste and bloat there is in the dollars that are spent, not only through the Department of Defense, but also, you look at the Department of Energy that's responsible for nuclear weapons. You look at the funding that goes towards our veterans, which is not nearly what it should be. Yes, to take care of those veterans and military families like your own after they come home from serving. So again, I just want to thank you, because this does not get talked about much, even in a presidential campaign where voters are looking at who do we want to be our next commander-in-chief to make these decisions. But even on a day-to-day basis, as Congress, the House and the Senate are making decisions about where our taxpayer dollars are going, and does it reflect the priorities of the American people?
That's right, Congress Lady. And why do you think, and I want us to talk a little bit about pre-COVID, yeah, and also now that we're in COVID, but I want to go to pre-COVID, because even before this pandemic, this is a crisis that we have. It's a worldwide crisis that we are going to have to deal with and marshal our resources in ways that we probably have never imagined. If somebody asked me 10 years ago or told me 10 years ago in 2020, you guys are going to be enduring something that hasn't happened for 100 years, I would not have believed it. So I want to talk pre-COVID first. Why do you think that so many, not just our elected officials, but so many citizens in this country believe that if we have bigger weapons and if we spend more money, that makes us safer? And then second part to that is something that you just brought up, which is everybody knows and believes, for the most, I believe, that our troops, our soldiers, enlisted women and men have to be protected and taken care of. But when we drill down a little more into how the money within the military industrial complex is being spent, as you laid out, it's not going to help our enlisted men and women by and large, not as much as it is for contracts. Not saying that none of that money goes to them. So that's a two-part. Why is it that we're so socialized in this country, even our elected officials, to not dare to dream a bigger dream and kind of reimagine what safety looks like? And then why doesn't a greater amount of that money go toward the men and women, or the women and men who are actually serving us?
I think if you look at, very broadly, the American people as a whole, and I appreciate this as a soldier, that there is a sense of gratitude and appreciation for those who volunteer to wear the uniform, and serve, willing to sacrifice everything for our country. And that support for the military, again, very broadly, without knowing, as you said, how is this $740 billion budget being spent, and even having a hard time grasping, what does $740 billion look like?
Yeah.
And if maybe we were spending a little bit less, how could those dollars be rerouted to serve really urgent needs that children and families and people have within our communities? So I think by and large, it's an appreciation and wanting to make sure, hey, we support our troops. We want to make sure that as they are sent out into harm's way to protect the American people, that they have what they need to be successful. I think that's a baseline kind of view of the military. And I agree with that. And so I look then to the policymakers who are responsible for knowing exactly where every one of those dollars are being spent, and being held accountable to make sure that they are being good stewards of our taxpayer dollars, and continuing to just throw more and more money at the Department of Defense does not equate to increased national security and safety for the American people, nor does it equate to a better quality of life for our troops and their families, whether deployed or at home. And I think that's where, holding leaders accountable and drilling down into the reality of where is all of this money going, and funneling this money to the military industrial complex, to these defense contractors to build these bigger nuclear weapons, to build these bigger missiles, to essentially fuel their own defense industry economy at the cost of us, at the cost of the American people. And I mean, frankly, that's where I believe our attention needs to be focused. It needs to be focused on our elected officials and we, the American people, not buying the line that any cuts to the defense budget equate harming our troops or inviting terrorists to attack our country. The right kind of leaders take this responsibility seriously about those decisions that are being made, and should do the right thing, not take money from these big defense contractors, not accept those PAC dollars that look, whether it's direct or indirect, they're buying that access to come in and tell you why you as a member of Congress should vote for or support their big funding request, or this new missile, or this new this or that. I've had some of these defense contractors tell me directly, and I appreciated their honesty, but they said, look, Tulsi, war is good for business. War is good for business. And so we can get into this a little bit later, but that's where it goes into, okay, the decisions that are being made about where our troops are not going, the kinds of weapons that are being built, the erosion of nuclear non-proliferation treaties that have been in place for a long time, which open the doors wide open, not for defense contractors to build pistols and rifles, but for them to build multi-billion-dollar nuclear weapon systems and the vehicles to carry them, that not only create a drain on our resources, but they escalate these tensions with other nuclear armed countries and push us as a nation closer and closer to the brink of nuclear catastrophe. And for what? They get to buy a bigger house, buy nicer cars. Like, what is it?
Right.
They get more and more wealthy while the country suffers.
Suffer. I mean, and the world, because
And the world,
something that is good for business, but not good for humanity. And the quicker we understand that, I mean, this country, the world, World War III just doesn't work.
Yep.
Because it's annihilation. It's humanity totally gone, and not just human beings, but we have a whole ecosystem that depends on human beings to do the right thing, and we're failing at that. Don't even get me started about the climate chaos that the whole world is enduring right now, and how there is a lack of leadership even on that we really do need world leaders to come together for that, just as we need world leaders to come together to understand that any type of nuclear war is total devastation. It could lead to annihilation of humanity as we know it. So I'm glad, I mean, that contractor at least was honest with you, Congresswoman. It is good for business.
Exactly.
We're going to add it's not good for humanity. You walk us down memory lane in terms of historically the nexus between what was happening generations ago under other administrations and what is happening now.
This is something that you won't hear talked about on any of the cable news networks. You won't hear talked about on the evening news. But we are facing the reality of a new our country has entered into a new Cold War with Russia and China. Yeah. Why should anybody who's watching us today care about that? Well, we should all care about that because of what we just talked about, that by entering into this new Cold War, we are seeing a proliferation, a beginning of mass new production and proliferation of new nuclear weapons, some of them larger, some of them smaller, what they call tactical nuclear weapons, completely ignoring the reality that President John F. Kennedy saw, which is a single nuclear weapon has the power to spark a war that would destroy our entire planet. Yeah. So if you don't mind, I was just going through some of his old speeches. I'd love to share just a short quote that I think really captures what's at stake here and why we should all join together in raising our voices to sound the alarm bells and once again hold elected leaders accountable to stop this insanity. Here, after negotiating the nuclear test ban treaty, President Kennedy, this is just a short excerpt from his address to the American people in 1963. He said, "A war today or tomorrow, if it led to nuclear war, would not be like any war in history. A full-scale nuclear exchange lasting less than 60 minutes with the weapons now in existence." Again, this is in 1963. The weapons now in existence could wipe out more than 300 million Americans, Europeans, and Russians, as well as untold numbers elsewhere. And the survivors, as Chairman Khrushchev warned the communist Chinese, quote, "The survivors would envy the dead. For they would inherit a world," end of quote, "for they would inherit a world so devastated by explosions and poison and fire that today we cannot even conceive of its horrors. So let us try to turn the world away from war. Let us make the most of this opportunity and every opportunity to reduce tension, to slow down the perilous nuclear arms race, and to check the world's slide toward final annihilation." Yeah. That encapsulates not only what our country was facing in 1963 and why he felt so compelled to do what everyone said was impossible and come to this agreement with Chairman Khrushchev at that time. This is the world that we face today. And this is the call that must be made to our leaders to exercise that same kind of bold courage. Otherwise, his warning will be our reality.
So true. And I mean, every single word of that just had me saying, you could feel it on a deep level. It wasn't just words, but it to me, it just kind of quickened me. And you and I, the word annihilation, I didn't even know that was even part of the quote when I used that term, but that's really what it is. And we have to get a clue. We're going to go to some questions, Congresswoman, but before
Sure.
we do that, I want to go back to something you said about the budget itself.
Yep.
So I believe that the 2019 discretionary budget was about, I think it was $1.19 trillion or so. And 61% of that budget, that's where that 740 billion, I believe, came from, is spent on the military industrial complex itself, 61%. And so healthcare or education, some of the domestic things that make for a holistic society are totally ignored to continue to feed what I call the beast, or feed the machine of the military industrial complex, and selling to our people, because as a nation, we're collectively socialized, although I'm talking about our collective consciousness, right, really believes that the more money that is our money, by the way, that is invested into this machine, the safer we are. When the antithesis, it is absolutely not true. But why is it that so many of us, either many people don't know that 61% of that budget is going towards the military industrial complex, or they either don't know or don't quite understand what the correlation is between that kind of spending on the complex and the lack of spending on domestic issues. And you have been one of the strongest champions in the Congress when it comes to laying out the picture of the differences between what we spend on the complex compared to what we do domestically.
I think both of those are probably true. When I think about most folks, they're trying to earn a living, they're trying to take care of their kids, take care of their families, trying to get by, which is hard enough as it is on a good day or a normal day, what to speak of the crisis that we are facing now. Maybe some of them turn on their evening local news and see what's going on locally. Maybe there's a 5-minute clip of that news that's about what's happening in the world. But unless they are one of the few who has the time or spends the time to really dig in on these issues, all that people are left with is what the mainstream media feeds them, or what their politicians, the sound bites their politicians tell them. Yeah. And this is where President Eisenhower's warning about the military industrial complex rings so true. And the notes tell us that, he warned us about the military industrial complex going unchecked. And the earlier draft of that farewell speech that he delivered, it talked about the military industrial congressional complex, because he saw then that the ties between leaders in Congress and the military industrial complex were too close. And that the only way to check that power from continuing to build would be to have an informed populace that keeps their leaders held accountable. So again, this is why your and Ben's really continued focus on this, I think, is so critical. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing I'd add to that is just, again, $740 billion going to the DoD, likely for this next fiscal year, fiscal year 21, $740 billion. How do you quantify that in a way that is tangible? So I pulled a few numbers in advance to try to help with that. And I want to use some examples of our money that has been spent in Afghanistan, one place among many, and what it was used for and what we could have used it for. Here's one: $14.7 million in Afghanistan was spent on building a storage facility that to this day never has been used. $14.7 million. That could have paid for processing almost 10,000 rape kits in Tennessee, completely clearing the backlog that they have. 300, here's another one, $335 million spent on building a power plant in Afghanistan that the Afghan people have never used and don't use. $335 million. That could have paid for permanent housing for 37,000 homeless Americans. Mm. And in addition, provided $250,000 grants to 20 small business owners to help them commercialize their businesses with new technologies.
My God.
And it's so sad. I mean, there's $34 million spent trying to convince the Afghan people to grow soybeans, even though history has, there's proof points in history, and the Afghan people told them, we have no interest in growing or eating soybeans, nor does the crop do well in the northern part of the country. Mm-hmm. There's a great website on ProPublica that maybe can be shared on your channel here, where it has a fantastic side-by-side comparison of the waste specific to Afghanistan that's been reported by the Inspector General's reporting, and also all of these different programs in America, healthcare, education, human services, that those dollars could have been spent on to address very basic needs for our people. What to speak of the potential for those trillions of dollars to have just reduced taxes for working Americans.
That's right.
So I think by helping to just kind of paint the picture, more and more people can see, okay, all of these things, $2 billion on 5,000 miles of roads the Afghan government has no capability to upkeep. That $2 billion could have bought X, Y, or Z here at home. That $2 billion did nothing to make our country safer. It did nothing to make our troops safer. It did nothing to advance the goals and values of that we hold dear and the priorities that we have.
And those examples are examples that people can understand. I mean, you just brought it down to rape kits and housing for the homeless, and especially and investments into small businesses, and especially right now with so many millions of people suffering to a greater extent because of the worldwide pandemic. So I thank you for that, Congress Lady. There's one thing so I want to remind people that they can go to Drop the Mic 2020 on Twitter. Please visit Drop the Mic 2020 on Twitter and also on Facebook. Get involved, join an organization, do some more research on your own. We want to remind you that those tax dollars that the Congresswoman just laid out, those are our tax dollars. I mean, it's your money, literally. And if you were making the decisions, would you want to spend your money? If you were deciding where your money went, would you want to spend it that way? And we do need more elected officials who understand that. Because a few months ago now, there was, and I believe that Congresswoman Barbara Lee was leading this charge, but to cut the military industrial complex, cut the Pentagon budget by just 10%.
Yeah.
And that failed in the House of Representatives. That the last time I checked, now you can tell me if I was wrong.
You're right.
Controlled by Democrats. I'm just trying to understand. And I think the major thrust of that bill was to use that money. And there was a companion piece, I believe. You guys might not call it companion, but we did in the legislature. But a companion piece in the Senate as well, even though we know what we're up against in the Senate. But I want to focus in on the House of Representatives. That is controlled by Democrats. And it did not pass. And the money was, they wanted to use the money primarily, you guys who supported that wanted to use the money primarily to help with COVID. Yeah. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I remember being on the floor and casting my vote in support of Barbara Lee's measure, and being disappointed but not surprised at the bipartisan opposition to it. And I think I'm glad you brought this up, because I know you are all about speaking the truth, no matter who you're talking to or what you're talking about. And our country needs more of that truth talk, regardless of whether you're talking about your family or someone else's political family. And I think this is what is so critical for folks to recognize is that unfortunately both parties have large numbers of people in positions of power who join hands and join forces to throw more and more money at the military industrial complex, to celebrate when a new bomb is dropped on a new country, to further fan the flames of war rather than choosing the path of diplomacy towards peace, recognizing that war should be the last resort.
Absolutely.
There was a resolution, there was an amendment that I introduced to one of the few years ago, that the big National Defense Authorization Act that is that big spending budget. Again, this year it's about $740 billion. I was combing through it, and the last minute I saw there was some language snuck in there that had to do with Iran. Mm-hmm. It was 3 pages. This provision was 3 pages long. And essentially what it did was authorize the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State to create and implement their strategy to counter Iran. So not come up with a strategy, bring it back to Congress for congressional review and approval, create and implement. And this is in the Trump administration that this provision was put in. This would have been wrong under any administration, but for all of my, the Democrats who criticized Trump on a number of things, they were proposing giving a blank check to his Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense to counter Iran without any check and balance. So I saw it, I was like, this is absolutely insane. And oh, by the way, it undermines Congress's constitutional responsibility as the entity responsible for declaring war.
Right.
Ceding that to the administration completely. I introduced an amendment on the House floor that very simply deleted that 3-page long provision. Didn't replace it with something else, just like, this is stupid, let's cut this out. Gave a speech on the House floor about it. There was some Republican opposition to it. Nina, 60 people voted to support that amendment. 60 people. The vast majority of members of Congress, out of 435, Democrats and Republicans voted against that amendment. And so this is, and the crazy thing here, Nina, is that when you look at different polls and different questions that people ask of the American people, they're sick and tired of our country sending my brothers and sisters in uniform to go and fight in wars that have nothing to do with our national, that don't serve our country's interests, putting their lives on the line, sacrificing everything. And for what? Leaving them questioning, what are we doing this for? They're sick and tired of it. And yet you do not see that reflected in leaders in Congress who are so ready to either continue to fuel existing wars in which we have no business waging, that don't make our country safer, or to go out and start new ones and drop bombs on other countries.
And it's horrible, Cold Pink and other organizations like that. I want to shout them out. I was talking to one of the leaders of Cold Pink, and she was just laying out, I forget where the quote came from, so I'm paraphrasing it, but mothers, it was all about mothers and not sending our sons and daughters, and I'm totally paraphrasing, to kill other mothers, sons and daughters. Think about us, think about whether that country was us instead of the other way around, and how would we feel? So this is something about humanity, and the United States of America should be that beacon when it comes to that, to try to bring world leaders together on a regular basis, to do a check-in. Can we do a self-care check internationally on trying to ensure that we don't have to have wars or just war at all, whether they're little wars, because there's no such thing as a little war, or the big war that could ultimately destroy humanity. I'm reminded of a quote by Albert Einstein that Ben Cohen and I talk about a lot, where Albert Einstein said, "You cannot simultaneously prevent and prepare for war." And that's pretty much where you've been living, which is you can't do both of those things. So let's have this real conversation about how safe we are as a nation, because we spend more money than any other industrialized nation combined. I think the next 7 or 8 industrialized nations combined. So we have what it takes to protect this nation. What we don't have is,
which is an important thing. Our military exists to fulfill that necessary mission. Yes. Of ensuring the national security of our country. So I want to just make sure that that's clear, that this is not an I hate the military rant. This is not, we don't need the military. Our military and our men and women perform this necessary function and deserve our nation's gratitude in doing so, alongside the sacrifices that are made by their families who support them in that mission. So how about we honor that service and that sacrifice by making sure that war and sending them into harm's way is always the last resort.
Always the last resort. I'm glad you brought that up, because whenever we're talking about these issues, the first thing people will say, you hate the military and you don't want to keep us safe. No, nothing. This is the opposite. And you know, my grandfather served in World War II. Mm-hmm. I have uncles who served in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. You know, my son, second lieutenant, in the National Guard. So baby, we get this. Exactly. This is real. But the way to keep us safe and to keep our men and women who have decided to serve in this capacity safe is not putting more money in the coffers of contractors. And that's really what we're talking about. And then not supporting our troops when they come back, making them grovel for service. Yeah. You know, how we have treated our veterans from the Vietnam War. Yeah. You know, and in particular, don't get me started on racializing that from every single war that's been fought in this country to this very moment, how African-American enlisted men and women were treated, the disparities that are there in that, and then how military families across the board suffer economically. I mean, if we're going to invest money, let's invest that money there. Exactly. That it shouldn't be homeless veterans. I mean, I don't want to see anybody homeless, but if we're going to put an exclamation point beside it, we should be ashamed that our veterans have to come and beg and grovel that there is a such thing as a veteran that is homeless or is in need. So there are other ways to invest that money without enriching, as you laid out, so that they can buy another home, another car. And nothing against people living a good life. They definitely should live a good life. But what is the investment of our taxpayers' dollar? What is the best, not to enrich what I would call predatory type of capitalism at the expense of our sisters and brothers who are putting it all on the line for our freedom. So, you know, Brother Albert Einstein was right. You cannot simultaneously prevent and prepare for war. And another one that I have, and we're going to go straight to questions, and then I got to ask you about your leadership in defending the freedom of the press. Yes. But Brother Asa Philip Randolph said the following: make war unprofitable, and that's what we're talking about, and you make them impossible. Mm. That is the great union organizer, Asa Philip Randolph. And another point you made, I said I'm going to questions, but I am, about the hypocrisy of saying that President Donald J. Trump is unstable, which he is, but yet you with a straight face vote for his budgets that contain giving more money in that direction. See, something don't fit here. Something ain't right.
And applaud him when he goes and drops bomb on another country like Syria, with many of our congressional leaders saying that this is the first time he has acted presidential, and then criticize him when he starts making moves to bring our troops home. Think about that for a second.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around
when he's dropping bombs on other countries, and criticize him when he does the right thing and starts turning the wheel to bring our troops home. That right there encapsulates the madness of this town. I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, and the people who run this town, but it also exposes how many congressional leaders in Washington, think tank leaders, you look at, lobbyists, you look at the people who move around this place, and you see how they are lockstep, hand in hand, working together to the detriment of our national security, of our country, of the well-being and welfare of our men and women in uniform. And for what? More money, more power, which they will defend seemingly at all costs. And this is what President Eisenhower exactly was warning about.
To the T, and it's backwards as hell. Yeah. As my grandmother would say, just totally backwards, makes no sense whatsoever. And we the people, I mean, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard and I are having this conversation, but this is really about all of us, not just the two of us, but all of us. And we have the power. We have the power to make the types of demands of our elected officials that reimagine what this could be and what it looks like and what real protection of our country and also our enlisted women and men really means. And that's what we're just we want you to reimagine this. So let's go to our first question, Congress lady. And this is, let me see if I know who this is from. I don't. So, oh, Joseph. I think it's Joseph. Hold on. Let me go. Okay, let me get to Michael first. Michael asked the following question, or makes the statement. Closing military industrial complex factories will put employees out of work. How do we keep factories open, turn the swords into plowshares? Yeah, and retrain, these employees for civilian production. What a great question. Thank you for that question, Michael. Congress lady.
Yeah, do it. Make it happen. You know, I've been able to go and visit a number of both small businesses and large businesses that are investing in domestic manufacturing again. You know, whether it's things like clothes or building materials or boots, shoes, all kinds of stuff. There's incredible entrepreneurship and innovation that is in the DNA of who we are as Americans. How about let's make some investments in that direction to do exactly that. That it is a false choice for anyone to say that we have to continue to build these bombs in order to, as we've seen, not only under this administration, but previous administrations, in order to sell them to other countries, in order to have a prosperous economy. Yes. This was something that I remember President Trump celebrating his massive weapons sales agreement, I believe, with Saudi Arabia, who is still waging war in Yemen with the United States support that Congress has not authorized, creating the worst humanitarian crisis that country has ever seen. Through the dropping of bombs, killing innocent men, women, and children, through crippling sanctions, blocking food, water, medicine from getting to people. And I just remember the quote that came from the administration was, well, hey, this is great for the American economy. And my response at that time, my comments at that time was, if the best thing that we can do for the American people and our economy is to create jobs by building bombs that countries like Saudi Arabia can go and drop on innocent people with the United States support, then we need new leadership. And that's really all this requires, to answer Michael's question. That's what this requires, is leadership and the commitment to be able to invest in opportunity and success to create new industries. The ideas are out there. The willingness to work hard is out there. I think it's just a matter of setting priorities as a country. How do we want, what kinds of jobs do we want to create for the American people? And how will they feel after a hard day's work, knowing that they have contributed to the well-being of our country and to the well-being of the American people?
That's exactly right. And where there is a will, there is a way. And Absolutely. We as American people should care about what's being done in our name.
That's right.
That's basically what you're saying, Congresswoman. Michael, thank you so much for that question. We are going to, I'm not sure who, Joseph. I believe it's Joseph. Hello, Joseph. Thank you. But his question is about the budget. Spending accountability is non-existent. Fraud, waste, and abuse is rampant based on how the budget is done. Spend the money or receive less next year. How do we change that?
There's not an easy answer to this. I mean, the short answer is hold your politicians accountable. I think it's easy, and we see this over and over where you know, pretty much everyone in the country is pissed off at Congress, but not at their own member of Congress. And so, you know, it's, you know, asking those questions, holding them to account, making sure that your vote is not something that's taken for granted by anyone for any reason. It has to be earned. So I think that's where it starts.
Yeah.
I know you know what that's about.
Yes.
And then look, I think there's other things that we as a country need to demand of our leaders to start to weed out the corruption and the revolving door that exists in Washington, where people are constantly paying off each other. You know, if you've got somebody who's working for a federal agency and they happen to work in contracting, they give a big contract to defense contractor X, and then they retire and go and work for them and end up getting, you know, a 20 times higher salary than they could ever get working for the government. I'm working on legislation right now that seeks to get at the heart of this essentially legal corruption that allows this power dynamic to continue to perpetuate, where those in power really are not interested in accountability because they're part of the problem.
Yeah, and thank you for introducing that kind of legislation. It is legalized corruption, bribery.
Another way to put it, really.
It really is, and we do need. I mean, we need campaign finance reform in this country. All of these things that we're talking about are really connected. Even when we talk about the environment, you know, I was looking at something that was tweeted out from the military-industrial complex, Drop the Mic 2020, and just reminding us that the Pentagon is the #1 industrial polluter in the world, and they get 54 cents of every dollar Congress spends. I mean, wrap our mind around that, sisters and brothers. That's real. It's our money.
Yeah.
So the impact on human life is not just the dropping of bombs. That in and of itself is not a good thing. Also, and it also what happens when bombs are not dropped, the impact on the environment. So it doesn't have to be as extreme. Basically, we're saying it doesn't have to be as extreme as dropping a bomb on somebody or engaging in war. It is how it impacts our everyday lives, and why climate chaos. But we can't do any other thing until we deal with the climate chaos, and all of this is at the hands of humankind.
So I'll just add in a quick comment there. Again, this comes down to choices and priorities. So rather than outspending every other country, every other nuclear armed country in the world in expanding the United States nuclear weapons arsenal, but we take some of that money and invest it in green, environmentally friendly fuel for our aircraft carriers, for our aircraft. There's, again, so much innovation, so much research being done, so much progress being done in these areas. Let's invest those dollars in renewable and sustainable energy sources so that our military bases can get off the grid, so that they can rely on these, you know, in Hawaii, we're grateful to have sunshine, but, you know, the Marine Corps base down the street, they are moving closer to their base being off the fossil fuel electrical grid. And they've got solar panels installed everywhere. They're doing great research in wave energy created from the movement of waves. And so there's opportunity there. It's, again, what are our priorities and how are we spending them? Again, we have to have a strong, capable, ready military. Let's make some investments to try to lessen that negative environmental footprint and impact that military has, whether it's here at home or in a country where they're operating abroad.
That's right. And where there's a will, there is always a way. Yeah. Our final question comes from Armstrong. Aloha, Nina and Tulsi. I love that word.
Aloha.
Aloha. You know, they making me go. I mean, I know we're talking about the military-industrial complex, but you and I have been at this together for a long time. We came together in 2016, and we've been rocking with one another ever since. And I remember I'm sure you remember when, I mean, how many islands? I mean, I felt like I needed a clone, but I believe I went to 4 or 5 islands in a matter of 2 days, and you were with me every step of the way. And it was to lift the grassroots.
That's right.
In the great state of Hawaii, and it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. Now I got to come back to Hawaii to have a vacation because that was work.
Exactly.
But we did that. I mean, it was something.
And everyone just so, because we're a little bit far out there in the Pacific Ocean, and
just a little bit
traffic or attention from people like you. So everyone on every one of those islands, they were so appreciative that they had the opportunity to meet you and to hear from you and to taste a little bit of that Nina Turner energy. It's like none other in the world.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It was a joy, and especially to be there with you, and then the former chair of the party, Tim.
Yep.
He was.
You're right. We got to get you back out.
Yeah, I would love to come back out. So that's a date. I'm putting that on the list. Even if it happens in 2021 or 2022, it's on my list.
There you go.
But thank you for that. You were such a great host for me there. And again, went to every single island that I was privileged to go to. And I'll never forget that time we had to spend together. So back to the Armstrong. Aloha, Nina and Tulsi. Thank you, Tulsi, for all your hard work on creating whistleblower protection legislation. What do you see as the path forward? Well, he's getting us right to where we want to go.
Perfect.
What do you see as the path forward for protecting folks like Snowden, Assange, and Winner? And what do you think are the odds of Snowden, of a Snowden pardon in Trump's final 2 months in office? What can we do to help? So this leads us to your resolution. I don't even know if Armstrong was reading our mind, but House Resolution 1175. As I said, you have been such a leader in defending the freedom of the press. So please, Congresswoman, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Armstrong, for talking about this, because this, again, is just like the issue we've been talking about, is one that doesn't get much attention on the mainstream media or even here in Washington, which is why I introduced this legislation. And for those who aren't familiar, House Resolution 1175 is a resolution that calls for charges against Julian Assange to be dropped, to drop the indictment that the United States government is currently pursuing for one very simple reason: our constitutional right to freedom of speech and freedom of the press. If people remember back when Julian Assange, let's go back a little bit. Under the Obama administration, there was some consideration about whether or not to indict Assange under that administration. And ultimately, I'm glad they came to that conclusion, the right conclusion, which was a prosecution of Julian Assange would set a very dangerous precedence for other prosecution of members of the press, news media platforms. And unfortunately, under this administration, they have pursued this indictment and are currently trying to bring Julian Assange to the United States, extradite him to the United States to prosecute him under the Espionage Act. And this is where, we should all as Americans be concerned about freedom. We talk about freedom, sometimes it's thrown around very lightly, as though it's something that exists no matter what. Yes, our freedoms are guaranteed in the Constitution, but we cannot take them for granted, because it is things like this and examples like this that seek to erode those freedoms. And the deafening silence that we hear from most politicians is dangerous, but it's also very telling that for whatever reason, they're choosing not to co-sponsor this resolution, or the resolution I introduced to drop charges against Edward Snowden for the heroic action that he took to expose lies within our government and expose the reality that our government has been spying, collecting information and spying on every single American without a warrant, this mass surveillance program. Politicians here are not talking about the legislation that I've introduced to reform the Espionage Act, which as it stands right now, if one is charged with national security concerns under the Espionage Act, as Snowden and Julian Assange have been. If you go to court, you don't have a fair day in court, because the law as it stands currently does not allow you as the defendant to speak to why you did what you did, to speak to your intent, to speak to what you were hoping to accomplish by releasing this classified information, for example. And so, you know, this is something that this is a problem that's been in place for a very long time. We saw, I think, among the highest numbers of individuals charged under the Espionage Act under the Obama administration. We are seeing now, again, individuals being charged and indicted under the Espionage Act, which speaks to why that needs to be reformed. Even Edward Snowden talked about how he would come back to the United States and face his charges if he knew he would have a fair day in court. But the Espionage Act, as it stands currently, does not allow for that. So all of this is to say, why is it that Democrats and Republicans leadership are not taking a stand for freedom, and how dangerous it is when you only speak out and defend freedom when you feel like it is your own freedoms under attack, but are silent when it is someone else who is suffering or being impacted by it, being very short-sighted not to see that this may be impacting that person today, but it could be you tomorrow.
Or somebody you love.
Or somebody that you love and that you care about. Exactly. And this is where I felt so strongly that this legislation had to be introduced to bring this issue to the forefront. Obviously, urging congressional leaders to pass it, but also just to hold them accountable. So that every one of you who's watching this, that you can call your representative or senator, email them, say, hey, have you co-sponsored this? If not, why not? You don't care about freedom? I mean, what's the issue here? What's the problem? Right. And that accountability, I think, is so necessary. And it's easy for members of Congress to skate by and tell you, oh, well, I didn't know about it, or I'm not aware of the issue, if there's not a piece of legislation that they have to make a decision about whether or not they'll add their name to. I know I'm going on this a little bit, but just to close out with the question about the odds of the Trump administration pardoning Snowden or Assange or reality winner. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I think that anything is possible in the next 9.5 weeks or so of this administration. And I am aware that there are certainly efforts underway to try to influence President Trump and his administration to do that, to provide those pardons. I don't know how they're going. I don't know how much progress is being made, but it's something obviously that I feel strongly needs to happen.
And thank you for sharing the information about your resolution. And again, for those of you who want to look up the resolution, it's House Resolution 1175. I know that, you know, people understand the Bill of Rights and what the First Amendment, but just to remind, I mean, the framers, imperfect, I always put that qualifier there because that's a whole nother lecture. Mm-hmm. They put freedom of the press in there for a reason.
Right. It's that counterbalance. Yeah. It's that right. Check and balance to our government.
Sure.
That we must have. And look, you know, I mean, how many times you open the New York Times, the Washington Post, and you see leaked classified information coming from an anonymous source within the intelligence community or the Department of Defense. This kind of thing happens all the time. And so if you see an example like this, where our government is very selectively choosing to prosecute certain individuals, but not other media sources, you know, and those media sources not standing up and really speaking out, recognizing that this is a threat to not only our known media, like, you know, the big ones, mm-hmm. but in this internet age, look, you and I, if we publish a blog or, you know, this conversation we're having right now, we could be considered as members of the media in some fashion, right? Every individual now has the power to become a voice in sharing information with the public.
That's right.
And so this threat that exists through the prosecution of Assange and Snowden and others is not one that is isolated just for people like them. This is something that is frankly a threat to every reporter, every member of the media, and every American.
Indeed. I mean, it reminds me, I know Reverend Dr. King wasn't talking about this issue in particular when I put this quote out here, but the whole notion of what affects one directly affects us all indirectly. And that's in every single aspect of our lives. And so, again, just bringing you information, getting you to try to think about these issues in a different way. Could be you, could be somebody that you love. And this is not about whether or not you believe, I mean, my take on this is not whether or not let me use myself. I believe whether or not what these individuals did was right, but it's about fairness. Yeah. And so under the espionage, right? If they
I'm
can't,
glad you said that, because that's exactly what they did or how they did it is not really the point here. The point here is about fairness in a judicial system,
right?
And it is about protecting freedom.
Exactly. That's it. And we can debate whether it was right or wrong, but that person or those persons should be able to have a fair hearing, if you will, a fair accounting,
yes,
if you will. That's really what we're talking about. And that's really what we want you all to think about. Well, Congress lady, I want to end on a more positive note here. Yes. Thanking you for your service, thanking you for running for president, thanking you for shaking things up. And even before you did that, thanking you for having the courage when you, and I say this all the time and I'm going to say it again, but when you were one of the co-chairs of the party and you saw that things were not going right and you called those things out as you continue to do across whatever positions that you hold, and you resigned from the DNC because what you saw and understood to be happening there was not right in a larger sense of being right. And your integrity didn't win you any, you didn't get a watch or a prize for it, not by the people who are in control. But I will tell you that the grassroots saw and understood very clearly what you did and still applaud you to this day. You are a person of integrity. I'm certainly glad to call you my sister girlfriend. And just thank you for everything that you've done in service. And the best is yet to come. You are not done. You may be leaving the Congress, but you are just getting started. And thank you so much for your service in our military as well. You are in complete package, but you do what you do with integrity. And that doesn't mean everybody has to agree. This is not about whether or not we all agree. If two people, nobody's gonna always agree with somebody. You wouldn't have a relationship with a doggone person, if the prerequisite was to always agree. So let me just lay that out there right now. But you have been a person of integrity and you have done what you believe to be the right thing to do. And it is that type of integrity and authenticity that has won so many people over in the grassroots in particular. So I want to salute you and thank you for all that you do and looking forward to your future endeavors.
Thank you, Nina. I am really heartwarmed by your kind words, and I'm just so grateful that our paths allowed us to converge and cross back in 2016.
As am I.
I actually remember I was in Ohio at an event for Joyce Beatty when you were running for state office. And that was when I first got hit by the Nina Turner dynamo, whatever you want to call it. I just remember leaving. I was like, oh my gosh, who is this woman? She is absolutely amazing. And I'm so glad that we've had the opportunity to get to know each other over the years. And, these are things you and I have shared with each other privately.
Yes, we have.
I have such great admiration for your resilience and your courage. You and I have been through some things and
we have
experiences that have tested and tried that resilience and courage. And again, whether in private or in public, in person or on television, you exude that integrity and that courage of calling it straight and speaking the truth. not because it benefits you. In fact, I would say maybe sometimes or oftentimes it does not.
Oftentimes it does not. You and I both have shared that in common.
Exactly.
Most of the time it does
But
not.
you stand tall with your head held high, knowing who you're fighting for, that you're fighting for the well-being of the people of this country, and as you said, for humanity. And you have my greatest admiration and respect for that. And I look forward to making all kinds of good trouble with you in the future.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Congress. I'm glad you said, one of a dear friend of mine named Martise Chisholm out of Chicago, Illinois, just started a group. And the name of that group is Making Good Trouble Matters. Yes,
Perfect.
Making Good Trouble Matters. And so it matters that you and I continue to make good trouble. Well, in our final, I want to say a few words, Congress, and I would like you to close us out. I want to wish people a happy Thanksgiving. I know that this is hard, that this is heavy for millions of people as we Thanksgiving. Some people probably feel like, what do I have to be thankful for, and where's the giving coming from? So I want to acknowledge that millions of people have lost their jobs. Millions of people are facing or have already faced eviction. Millions of people lost that extra $600, Congress lady, and there has not been another stimulus package, even in the face. I said I was going to try to be positive, but I just got to lay this out. In the face of a damn pandemic, still, and both parties, shame, just for shame to have so many people suffering, both adults and children suffering because they just can't get their shit together. That's real. So I'm gonna lay that there. I'm hoping that people can find a way to find some thankfulness and some giving, and to really just find their source. As hard, gut-wrenchingly hard as this moment is, some people have lost loved ones, friends and family members. There are very few people who don't know somebody or know of somebody that has been impacted by COVID. And so hard, very, very hard Thanksgiving. I do want to wish in all of that people a happy Thanksgiving, and I hope people are able to find something. And if you are so blessed, if you are one of those people where somebody would love to trade places with you, if you can give a kind word or make a donation. There are a lot of food drives going on. A lot of organizations give out food at this time. Give $1, give $5, go to the food bank in your local area and be a volunteer. But do something if you are able to make somebody's life just a little brighter, because what is happening right now is hard as hell. I'm trying to hold back the tears because when I think about how deep this moment is, I mean, people were facing pandemic even before this pandemic.
Yes.
If you are among the poor, the working poor, and the barely middle class, but what is happening right now has just revealed the fissures in a system that does not work for the majority of the people in this country, and we have to do something about it. So it's not just about the military industrial complex, it's about all the damn complexes Absolutely. That we have to deal with just in everyday life. So, oh my God, just a long way for me to say I'm trying to focus and find the good. I do want people to have a happy Thanksgiving. If there's an elder in your life, or maybe an elder in somebody else's life, if you can make that phone call. Depression is up, especially among the elderly, and also on the opposite end of that spectrum, younger people who are at the most social times of their lives. So if you can just, even if it's only just to give a good word to somebody, please do what you can where you are with what you have, to be, in the words of Brother Mahatma Gandhi, the change that you want to see in the world. You don't have to have a fancy title to be able to do that. And Congresswoman, we're going to close with you. I know I went all around the block there trying to find.
Oh, it's perfect.
But in any case, okay. Yeah, the floor is yours. The closing is yours.
That is the perfect message to end on, Nina, that even in the midst of this incredible hardship that so many people are facing, loss in so many ways, yes, because of this pandemic. Just recently, I found out that this amazing veteran who was a West Point graduate, had deployed multiple times, young man in LA who I got to know through my campaign. He was a volunteer. He had gone to Standing Rock. He was fighting to protect our environment, and he was there every time we needed anything to help in our campaign. He took his own life. just recently. So, you know, it is, life is short. And every one of us as individuals has a choice to make every day about how we want to live that life and what kind of impact we will have on others. And what I try to do in my daily meditations and my daily practice is really to just practice gratitude. And just this week, as we've been heading towards Thanksgiving, it's so easy to get busy with everything. But, I found myself, when I was driving down the street, I was thinking about someone maybe I haven't talked to for a while. And instead of just letting that thought come and go, when I got to where I was going, I stopped and I pulled out my phone and just sent a quick message saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about you and I hope you're doing well." And, I heard back from somebody today and they said, "Tulsi, that message came you could not have known, but that message really came at a time where I really needed to hear that. And so thank you." So as you said, Nina, there are ways, large and small, perhaps, that we can practice this gratitude in our own lives, even in the midst of hardship, taking that time to reflect and be mindful of the blessing of life, the blessing of breath that we have in our bodies. And again, whether it's in person to people we know or on social media with total strangers, let's make a conscious effort to send that positive energy, that aloha, that love out into the world, because Lord knows we all need it.
Amen to that. And thank you all so very much for joining Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard and myself. Just know you are the change. You are. Be the change. Brother Mahatma Gandhi said that you want to see in the world. We are sending you aloha and thank you, and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. Aloha, Nina.
Aloha.